exploring how we can master ourselves by looking at how authors and experts say it is possible, with your host, Shashiti Basu.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 100 of How to Be, with me, Shashiti, as your timid presenter, guiding you through life's tricky topics and skills by reading through the best books out there. Yes, we have reached 100, so please take this time to celebrate with us. On that note, we are often told to think about what we have learned from important life events. I've learned a lot of lessons over my own, both good and bad. Highlighting something positive, I spent 27 years playing guitar, starting from the age of 7 years old. Despite my inordinate amount of stage fright, I played in the back with a Cuban big band for years, and at one point was jamming with the guitarist from Duran Duran and Buena Vista Social Club. But alas, with my degenerative neuropathic condition, I eventually lost my motor skills when I was 29 years old, and that was the end of my life with guitar. I wouldn't change a thing though. It taught me to experience so many incredible cultures through the shared language of music and the importance of persistence. I'd come a long way from sitting every day and stretching my little fingers out so I could spider across the fretboard. As the 13th century poet Rumi said, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself." So what life lessons have you learned from the extraordinary parts of your life? Here are psychology and neuroscience expert Ruth Kudzi, who wrote the best-selling book How to Feel Better, and Mindful Frontiers LLC creative director Anne-Marie Emanuelli on their thoughts.
The biggest lessons that I've learned from some of the most challenging and extraordinary parts of my life are to always see the opportunity. Even when it feels like you are against everything and you're walking through treacle, there are things that you can learn and move forward. And some of the biggest lessons I've had is when I've really had my back up against the wall and I've been wondering, what can I do? And I've found great solutions, created things, made connections, and been able to move forward and actually create great businesses, but also move forward in my career in the past too. So remember, it's never the end.
An extraordinary moment in my life is when I decided to bring meditation into my school classrooms. This was in 2017 when I was a full-time high school teacher. Our academy had experienced 3 student suicides in the span of about a year, 2 of which were right before the new school year. This experience sent me into deep grief, and I decided to resume a personal meditation practice that I'd let go for some time. During one of my meditations, I had the realization that my students would benefit from this self-compassion practice, since they were certainly dealing with grief as well. Mindfulness and meditation were also introduced to my colleagues as well as a social-emotional activity that benefited the school as a whole. Bringing mindfulness into classrooms was a very positive decision that led to where I am now, a certified meditation guide and coach. As Thich Nhat Hanh said simply, the way out is in.
Our first book is from the legendary Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who was the first person to reach both poles by surface travel and the first to cross the Antarctic continent unsupported. In the 1960s, he was removed from the SAS regiment for misuse of explosives, but after joining the army of the Sultan of Oman, received that country's Bravery Medal on active service in 1971. He is the only person yet to have been awarded 2 clasps to the Polar Medal for both Antarctic and the Arctic regions. Fiennes has led over 30 expeditions, including the first polar circumnavigation of the Earth, and in 2003 he ran 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents in aid of the British Heart Foundation. In 1993, Her Majesty the Queen awarded Fiennes the Order of the British Empire, an OBE, because on the way to breaking records, he has raised over £14 million for charity. He was named Best Sportsman in the 2007 ITV Great Britain Awards, and in 2009 he became the oldest Briton to reach the summit of Everest. We're talking about his book, Climb Your Mountain, Everyday Lessons from an Extraordinary Life. It was such an honour speaking with him. Hence, here is a snippet of our chat but find the full interview on www.howtobe247.com on the YouTube channel.
I found that over the time of giving lectures, which is how I make my living at the moment, that is what you get the questions on. On these things is what you get the questions from the audience. It's obviously, there is an interest by people who go to the lectures. I mean, I had one in Edinburgh recently at 1,500 people, and they asked questions of the nature which I covered in this book. Not all of them, but some of them. Well, if you set out what you are aiming to do, in the case of our group, we've spent 60 years actually going for world physical and geographical records that have not yet been done by people. And unfortunately, the reason they haven't been done by people is because they can be quite dangerous unless you plan very carefully and look to see where the people in the past who've tried have come to grief. When you have the plan and you know which record you're going for, you start off by contacting a possible sponsor. We, as always in 60 years, gone with the motto, never pay anybody for anything at any time. You get into debt that way. Overall, we've raised, at the last count, £19.8 million for the charities chosen very often by a sponsor. And people like Paul Sykes from the Sheffield area originally, he has paid, if we need to climb a mountain and we aren't very good at climbing, then we need instruction from a really good climber, and that person will be paid by Paul, who has been behind it and knows this is a good way of getting money from the general public for chosen charities like, well, I'll tell you one or two. It went back to the 1970s, and our patron of the expedition, Prince Charles, he basically said one day when we went to brief him on the next expedition that we wanted him to be patron of. And he wouldn't be patron of any of the expeditions over all these 40 years or so unless we explained exactly what we were doing. And on this occasion in the mid-70s, he said, and who this time are we going to be raising money for? Which charity? And I had to say, sir, we don't raise money for charities. That's not part of it. We do science, and we beat the Norwegians, hopefully, or our main rivals at the time. And but we've never raised money. He said, oh dear, well, I wouldn't have been your patron if I'd known that. And I'm afraid you're going to have to, because it's a good way of getting money for good causes. So I said, well, who for? He said, I'd let you know. And a couple of months later, he chose multiple sclerosis, and we got 4.2 million just from that one as a result. We're up to 19.8 million just because of his one suggestion or comment. Well, my late wife died after 38 years of marriage, but I'd known her since she was about 9. And she died, and for a year or so, I really did nothing. I was just sort of sorrowful to be doing anything at all. And I thought, I must snap out of this. And what better way of really concentrating on something like trying to beat a phobia? And I had 2 phobias. One was spiders. But when I joined the Arab army, the Arabs, who I was in command of for a couple of years, fighting in Dhofar, at that time, the spiders were wolf and camel spider, 11 inches across, hairy with big eyes. And I was forced to either fear loss of respect from the people I was in command of for that period, wonderful Arabs, and or to do what I always did, which is to show my fear and sort of smash at them, in fear. When I first got dropped by an aeroplane in the desert to meet the 30 guys that I would be with for 2 years, they had a big fire and goat's meat, and sitting around the fire, one of these camel spiders ran across the top of my trousers, and I know that I would have screamed and smashed it. The fear of losing their respect was even greater. And anyway, after 2 years out there in the desert, the spiders, coming in and out of your sleeping bag, they don't bite you, called non-forced confrontation, which slowly you lose your fear. But with vertigo, years later, as I say, after Ginny had died, with that vertigo, you have to find someone who's prepared to take you on, a really good climber, and teach you how not to be frightened. When we got married, after I got back from Arabia from the army and left the British Army from which I'd been posted, the only thing, I hadn't got any A-levels or anything like that, but I had been in the Cold War in Germany at that time, in the 60s, in a tank regiment. And my dad had been killed in the Second World War in the same regiment when he was colonel. And he was killed 4 months before I was born. But Mum told me all about him, and I grew up wanting to be a colonel of that regiment, the Scots Greys. The trouble was that, not in his day, but in my day, to go to Sandhurst College, which is necessary if you're going to try and be a colonel in the British Army, you have to have A-levels, which I hadn't got. So I only could spend 8 years in the British Army. That was what happens if you go not through Sandhurst, but through a cadet college, Moderns. When we got married, after leaving the army, I wasn't sort of making an income. Jenny had been with the Scottish National Trust as a mountain guide up there, and was also back down south, and we needed an income. And Jenny knew that when I was in Germany during the Cold War, I'd been in charge of what they called adventure training, which was to take the Scottish soldiers, 600 in a regiment, but not more than that, maybe 24 at a time, canoeing on the rivers in Germany, like the Rhone and the Rhine and the Loire in France and so on, in summertime, and teaching them basic hill walking and so on with the right kit. And in winter in Bavaria, I taught them Langlauf cross-country skiing as the adventure training officer of their regiment, to stop the soldiers getting so bored because the Soviet army never did attack, and they started beating each other up in the NAFI.
Oh, gosh.
Adventure training was important. So Ginny said, well, why don't we do that as man and wife? We started a business. In those days, they weren't called unicorns. So we did, and our rule, which I told you, was never to pay anybody anything. Don't have a bank account. Everything must be sponsored. And she reckoned that if we went for geographical records, at that time when people could only watch 4 channels on TV, BBC 1 and 2 and ITV 1 and 2, and the very favourite series in those days was called The World About Us series, and it very often would send a team, BBC film documentary team, on an expedition to cover it on film, and that would get your sponsors happy. And that's what Ginny suggested we do: start with big expeditions, not start small and try and get big. And it worked. So on one expedition alone, we had 1,900 sponsors, including a 40-year-old ice-strengthened ship and a resupply plane. We didn't fly, but had to be resupplied from it. And that was Jenny's suggestion at a time when she said, 2 of the expeditions we've done, it's worked. BBC have made films. We've got sponsorship when we want it now. So what we've got to do is move on to the really difficult one. And she suggested that the only polar expedition, which our rivals, the Norwegians, hadn't already done, was to go around planet Earth vertically instead of the normal way, which is horizontally. So the first surface circumnavigation of the Earth is what she decided we ought to do next. After 7 years' work on foreign offices, on practicing Greenland, selecting 2 people for the team out of 180 volunteers, and that was her plan, to answer your question. Well, I only had one hand, the fingers frostbitten in all the years of the expeditions, but when I'm choosing a team, I wouldn't take somebody who had frostbitten fingers or toes, because you become more susceptible to it. So it would be stupid to take someone who is liable. And they're a nuisance, and they've been a nuisance ever since. One of the occupational hazards of doing that sort of thing, particularly in the Arctic, where you're falling into cold water, not the Antarctic where you're falling into dry crevasse holes. Well, crossing Antarctica, which is bigger than America and had not been crossed when we did it, except by a two-team, one starting from one side and meeting in the middle sort of thing. Nobody as a single team from one side to the other by any route had ever crossed Antarctica. Not Scott or Shackleton, not Amundsen or Nansen, who one reads about and I've written about, but we did manage it, but only just. And the person who was with me, Professor Michael Stroud, is Britain's expert on stress nutrition. And when Jenny asked him to join us, he basically was the director of the British Army Personnel Research Establishment. And his expertise was, well, it's actually starvation, but he called it stress nutrition, which sounds better. And to see how a person can be made to travel much further in a war situation or any situation with less weight of food. So on the one you were talking about, the Arctic crossing, which we knew would, because it hadn't been done by the Norwegians, we knew it would be difficult. And he changed our normal diet for the expedition to 69% fat for 120 days. And I have to say that at the end of that expedition, I had a massive heart attack and double bypass, which I blamed on Mike, but it didn't stop us doing other expeditions after that.
Sir Ranulph says before you can strap on your skis, desert boots or climbing crampons, you need to decide what you're aiming for in life. After all, when boiled down, what is any life but a series of opportunities to grasp and challenges to overcome? You may not have served in the SAS, discovered a lost city in the sands of Arabia, climbed the deadly north face of the Eiger, or summited Mount Everest, but each of us has goals we want to achieve and our own metaphorical mountains to climb. For the explorer, he had to learn to pick himself up from failure or regret and go again. We will all lose people we love, and we have to deal with that loss. We will all age and sometimes be afraid and have moments of self-doubt. We will all be faced with the choice to stop or to push on to our own pole and beyond. He describes a nightmarish trek in Antarctica where he had to drag a 485-pound sled, 1,700 miles, as he and his companion strived to become the first people in history to cross the whole Antarctic landmass on foot without outside support. Unfortunately, the ice shelves began to collapse, with craters and geysers appearing. He said, "To avoid being crushed by the very thought of what lay ahead, I forced myself to concentrate only on a much closer goal." He used his competitive nature against his companion to keep spurring him on. Despite suffering from hypothermia, they reached the South Pole. Before anything, Sir Ranulph says, "Find your mountain." To quote him, he says, "Try chewing a few prawns before you announce to the world that you intend to devour an entire lobster. What will drive you on when things get tough?" In 1967, he was in the SAS and was sent to Muscat in Oman and thence south to the war zone of Dhofar. The Marxist opposition, who were at home in the jungle-clad Dhofari ravines, had received their training and automatic weapons from the Soviets. The terrain was precarious in the middle of guerrilla warfare. They were hugely outnumbered and were staying in an environment designed to kill them with poisonous snakes and other animals. In Dhofar, he learned never to relax within a war zone. No operation was over, no matter how successful it appeared, until every man was safely back in base. The same is true in any challenging moments we might face in life. Continue to expect and plan for the worst. Keep your resolve high, and don't relax your focus until you are well through and out the other side. He also learnt from his unofficial advisor, Mohammed Rashid, many life lessons during this time, including, "Those who talk too much will never guard a secret," he said. "They would do better to keep silent so that their shortcomings lie hidden. Then they may pass as wise men." Despite not having A-levels and therefore not being able to move on to becoming a colonel, he realized he still had the skills to be an effective and resilient leader. Hence the next step is ambition. As he says, life is too short to waste time on second-class ambitions. Expedition lectures were easy to give, so all in all he decided that, for the future, expeditions might well provide a viable format for self-employment. His girlfriend at the time, Ginny, who then became his wife, and Sir Ranulph soon began working on his first professional expeditions, skiing over a high glacial drift route in Norway and a long journey down the rivers of Canada by boat. And the die was cast. He would do this for a living. She suggested travelling properly around the world, on its axis, through the poles, both of them, keeping more or less to the same meridian all the way. She said, if this were to be their chosen line of business, they must never waste time planning expeditions that anybody had done before. They must be the first humans, not merely the first British, to get there. Such a policy would, of course, mean that the failure rate would be high. Go for the big ones, even if that means a higher failure rate. This is surely true for any life, no matter your background or abilities. At some point in any career, a normally unjustifiable risk might need to be taken to make the quantum leap from the mediocre to the big time. The Transglobe expedition was therefore launched on paper in early 1973 and was to involve both of them full-time for the next 10 years. They approached over 3,000 companies in London during the first 2 years. By 1975, 760 of them had agreed to provide them with their goods or services. After 7 years full-time work, they obtained the full £29 million in hardware and £2 million in fuel to be delivered in the remotest parts of the world. Hence, as a leader, he believes that whenever feasible, you should pick your team on character, not skill. You can teach skills, you can't alter character. The same is true for you. If you have the motivation, then you can do the work to fill any skill gap you might have. We all dream of the things we want to achieve in our short lives. But once you have articulated that ambition, you could do worse than to ask yourself, what is that first push to make the stone roll? What is stopping you, other than simply starting? He quotes his friend Michael Stroud when they attempted to do 7 marathons. Whereas most people look at the very big challenges, whatever the field or their walk of life, and start from the position of, I can't, Ran and I make a simple word substitution and say, why can't I? I can't run 7 marathons. Easily transforms into the question, why can't I run 7 marathons? Once it was asked, we felt obliged to find the answer. Teamwork, Sir Ranulph says, is essential. Since the idea of Transglobe was for a small group to travel from Greenwich through both poles and back to Greenwich without flying 1 yard of the entire 3-year route, he knew they would need 2 or 3 very special individuals. The fewer people the better is his general rule, since human beings are quite badly designed for getting on with each other when under stress. How to choose them? He has always believed that if you are to be held responsible for other people's safety, then you must check them out as thoroughly as you would your own child. When you are looking for your team, always presume the worst. On their earlier Norwegian expeditions, they had the worst. They all said they could climb, but no one, including the author himself, had ever climbed before. A blunt approach to setting the conditions for a successful team on an expedition is essential. But there is something to learn here for any working group, or indeed any friendship or relationship. Always be direct and plan for the worst possible conditions. He says to look for 3 things: level-headedness, patience, and good nature towards others. He wanted men who could look after themselves in extreme conditions, possessed plenty of creative energy and initiative, and would normally be selected as leaders in whatever field of activity they chose. Bad apples must be tossed aside at the earliest opportunity, and if you find confrontations hard, always remember that an argument usually produces plenty of heat but little light. Be bold, confront any differences of opinion or disagreements head-on, after which the hatchet should be buried and the handle not left above ground. Leadership is a key skill in expeditions. In polar expeditions, as in most tight-knit groups, there is usually a process of selecting a natural or psychological leader. It is a conflict akin to a fight for domination within a wolf pack, a more or less overt challenge to the established formal leadership. How he deals with this threat to his authority is one of the tests through which most commanders have to go through. Under stressful conditions, even imagined molehills can easily become great mountains, and vicious storms blow up in teacups of hurt pride. The whole team must strive to work as one, or they would certainly fail in the Herculean tasks that lay ahead. Sir Ranulph ventured some guidelines of patience, tolerance, and selflessness that might help, and suggested that anybody who felt they could not take the setup on board should feel free to leave. The crossing of Antarctica from one side to the other and unassisted by outside groups had thus far never yet been achieved. The frozen continent, at 5,500 million square miles, dwarfs the USA. The committee, however, remained doggedly against their travel, attempting the ambitious journey without a third man. In desperation, he appealed directly to the boss. In the case of the Transglobe, the relevant person was their patron, HRH, the Prince of Wales, or now King Charles III as he's known. And off they went. Wonder is an important lesson Sir Ranulph learnt about in his quest to test himself while exploring the remotest and challenging parts of the earth. Over the years, he says he has found great meaning in the tens of millions of pounds they raise for charity. And some of those charities, such as those for cancer and heart conditions, went on to touch his own life and those he loved. The wonder aspect wasn't necessarily from nature, but in the pursuit. For him, he found meaning in the challenge, hence he asks, what fires you up and makes you leap out of bed in the morning? What will motivate you to keep going through life's headwinds? In this case, Sir Ranulph had in mind to search for the Queen of Sheba's lost city Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands. He says he may not be one for admiring the view, but here was something glorious to fire his imagination. He was determined to find it. What he didn't know is that it would take more than 20 years to do so. From 1968 onwards, he attempted several times to locate it. He even enlisted the help of NASA through an acquaintance to try and photograph it from above. In the 1990s, the trip finally happened and the miraculous discovery was made. Some of the rooms that the team uncovered in their second month of the area of Shears in Oman yielded rich finds covering the entire period from the 2nd millennium BC until about 300 AD, when trading activities seemed to have dropped off. The finds included 6 soapstone chess pieces, 3 inches high, part of the only chess set ever unearthed in Arabia, and well over 1,000 years old. One axe head was 250,000 years old. Ironically, the location for the lost city was the base camp where Sir Ranulph would set off looking for the city itself. Another wondrous but treacherous trip was the Northern Glacier Passage above Canada. After hundreds of miles, within 4 days, the boat was frozen into the bay, and it was to remain there undisturbed for 7 years. They had, however, made the first ever open boat journey through the Northwest Passage. He says he often thinks of the sight of that ship. Wonder can be found in the faces of our loved ones, in landscapes or art or religion, or it can be found in the moments when our lives come into crystal focus, the moment when those matchstick masts appear over the horizon and you truly feel like you've made a mark. Look out for those moments and treasure them. Failure is a part of life. In order to win at some of your big goals, you are bound to lose at others along the way. By this point, all the great polar challenges, north and south, had already been achieved by groups of 2 or more. All that was left was for an individual to try it unaided. He was injured several times during the trip. His heels developed blisters, so he strapped on foam snippets cut from his bed mat and tried to ignore them. His chin, wind-burnt, became swollen and poisoned, so he lanced it with a scalpel until the swelling subsided. His eyes lost their long-distance focus after a week staring at the glare through his goggles. His eyes became mere slits, and he resembled a rabbit with advanced myxomatosis. Every evening he attended to his developing crotch rot with Caniston powder and applied lengths of industrial tape to raw areas. At this stage of their 1993 Antarctic crossing, Mike Stroud and him had already been in a state of semi-starvation and severe physical decline. Even though he felt fine, he was actually about to get worse. On the 25th day, he started to get violently sick, and it turned out to be kidney stones. On 27th of December, with 2 days of tablets left, he decided that the danger of irreparable damage to his kidneys as well as the risk of running out of painkillers, was too great a price to pay for the chance of being the first to cross the Antarctic solo, and his trip was cut short as a result. Assessing the whole enterprise afterwards, he says his big mistake was concentrating during training on manhole fitness rather than on becoming a wind assistance expert. The toil and the suffering is cut to a minimum, and that, after all, is what leads to success. While the trip failed, the charitable side was a massive success, raising over £2 million for breast cancer research. It helped set up Europe's first dedicated breast cancer research centre. There was another failed attempt after that, in which he lost his sled in the icy waters. He attempted to retrieve it, taking off his mitts, and while usually his revival techniques for his hands would work, this time it didn't. As a result, the tips of his fingers on his left hand were eventually amputated due to severe frostbite. Actually, he did it himself, with a microblade, because of the ongoing pain from it. He says there's no point in crying over spilt milk, since if you go for the big ones and you win some in your lifetime, you can be sure you will lose at others on the way. The best course, he usually found, has been to shrug, note what you have done wrong, and apply yourself quickly to try again. As in the famous quote attributed to Confucius, "Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." Whatever life throws at you, you have a choice. He told himself, if I have no fingers, then I must learn to climb without fingers. What happened to them is not in my power, my reaction to the event is. Sir Ranulph also learnt extensively about fear. The key is to have the courage to share your fears with someone you trust, to ask for help and accept it. Just like me, the explorer was afraid of spiders, having been bitten as a kid in South Africa. In Oman, while he had to command a unit, he had to face his fears. As he mentioned, with 30 soldiers watching him, a gigantic wolf spider crawled over his leg. He had to get used to it as they were common in the desert, and eventually he did. This is a key point about fear in general. So much of it is in the idea of the thing you are afraid of, the anticipation. When it happens, it's not always that bad. He had learned the secret of dealing with fear in Tolfa, faced with the daily terror of some bullet, shrapnel shard, or mine blast. He had learned the secret all over again some years later, training for a dizzying parachute jump onto the Fabog-Tolsbrug Glacier in Norway and more. What he learned was keep a ruthlessly tight clamp on your imagination. With fear, you must prevent, not cure. Fear must not be let in the first place. Think of anything but the subject of your fear. Never look at the void you are about to jump into. In this case, he was climbing the notorious Eiger or North Face, which has the German nickname Mordwand, meaning murder wall. It is 5,900 feet high, or 1,800 meters, and incredibly dangerous. He had to climb it while missing the tips of his left fingers. At 62 years old, he had managed to cross the Hintersteuger Traverse on the great north face of the Eiger. In 1961, Austrian climber with a brilliant repertoire of ultra-severe alpine ascents, Adolf Meyer, fell 4,000 feet and died on the climb. Without mountaineer Kenton Coole's instruction, the author says he could have never even contemplated setting foot on the Eiger's north face. And here, of course, is another key lesson about fear. Facing it alone is one thing. The key is to have the courage to share your fears with someone you trust, to ask for help and accept it. Of course, a massive factor Sir Ranulph contends with is his mortality, with everything he does. In 2003, while planning another venture to run 7 marathons, he had a massive cardiac event and had to have a bypass. He says death has always been a possibility in his chosen career, but he does not dwell on it when he is on expeditions, any more than he dwells on it in his day-to-day life. Much as with fear in general, he preferred to stuff all thoughts of danger to the back of his mind rather than lying awake at night thinking about the end. He thinks of placing his next step firmly rather than the crevasse that may lie beneath it. In this way, he did not feel guilt for his expeditions despite having a daughter and wife at home in later years, because he could technically die any moment in time, either from a heart attack or falling off a mountain. What he didn't realize at the time was that his wife Ginny had an aggressive form of stomach cancer, and so he had to consider her mortality. In 2004, she sadly passed away, and as expected, Sir Ranulph was left bereft from her death. What he realised was that each of us in our brief lifespan has a chance to spend our time in sadness or in joy. Hence he decided to climb Everest at the age of 60, missing fingers and with cardiac issues after this. Ginny had told him many times over the years that should she die before him, he was to remarry as soon as possible. At a lecture he had given to the Chester branch of the Royal Geographical Society the previous summer, he had met one of their members, Louise Millington. She was 36 years old, full of life, mercurial, and she jolted him out of his miserable state. They agreed to marry in March 2005 and honeymoon at the Everest Base Camp in Tibet. The problem was living and working well above 17,000 feet. The human body starts to deteriorate, indeed to rot. It literally consumes itself for energy. Sleeping becomes a problem, muscle wasting and weight loss takes place, and this process of deterioration continues more quickly the higher the altitude. Scientific advice by 2005 strongly recommended that nobody should stay at that height for more than an absolute maximum of 10 days, and that, at or above 26,000 feet, the so-called death zone, acclimatization is just not possible. So why on earth do people choose to risk their lives on Everest year after year? For Sir Ranulph, first is to raise money for charity, and second, with both poles conquered, the mighty peak of the Himalayas remains as the greatest conquest available to the explorer. Unfortunately, he almost had another heart attack, and had to abort the mission, but he still managed to go very far, whereas only 50% of climbers managed to reach anywhere near that high, especially during the season. A 40-year-old Scottish climber actually died of a heart attack the same day on the other side of the mountain. Despite this, he was able to raise £2 million for an MRI scanner unit and catheter laboratory in the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London. The British Heart Foundation eventually raised the £2 million through the Ranulph Fiennes Healthy Hearts Appeal, despite his failure on the mountain. But at 62 years old, unexpectedly, he became a father for the first time, so it was an entirely new challenge. Perseverance is a massive part of the challenges. What else is life if not the ability to overcome, the will to continue to push past the barriers in our path and to reach the goals we set ourselves? Whatever business you are in, it is bad practice to allow your chief rival to have a clear run at the main prize without even mounting a challenge. In this case, it was the Antarctica mission in the 1990s. We all have our methods to drive out the mental demons that creep in under conditions of such stress. His challenge partner, Mike Stroud's term for getting lost in his thoughts was mind travelling, a vital form of defence against negative thoughts. In the end, the Guinness Book of Records stated the longest totally self-supporting polar sledge journey ever made and the first totally unsupported crossing of the Antarctic landmass were achieved by Ranulph Fiennes and Mike Stroud. They covered a distance of 1,350 miles. In the wake of his heart attack in 2003, by far the sanest course of action would have been to retire. But he could not shake the idea that Mike had put in his head of running 7 marathons in 7 continents in 7 days. When it came to confessing his future marathon intentions, he had hopes that his surgeon, Professor Angelini, would be sympathetic. After all, he still held the Italian 800 metres record himself. He didn't realise, however, the terms of the marathons he was going to race, and only thought he was running 1 marathon. They zigzagged around the world. Unfortunately, both their conditions were severe. The independent newspaper were clearly wary of the challenge. They quoted a Loughborough University sports science professor saying, "Ranulph Fiennes and Mike Stroud are risking permanent damage and even death by trying to complete their challenge. They could suffer potentially fatal kidney failure because their bodies will have no time to recover between each of their 26-mile runs." They went from Patagonia, Falklands, Sydney, Singapore, the UK, Cairo and New York in 7 days, all after suffering from a heart attack and multiple injuries. In 2009, able to focus on the Everest on the third time lucky principle, Mary Curie, the charity, pointed out that Sir Ranulph had become, at 65 years old, an old-age pensioner, and if he could summit, he would definitely be the first OAP to do so, which would, in their opinion, raise over £2 million. keeping to a very slow pace all the way and cosseted by the ever-patient guide Tundu, he reached the summit at some 29,029 feet, which is 8,848 meters above sea level, about an hour or two before dawn. Sadly, Tundu died in an avalanche in 2017, which shows the precarity of the situation. Sir Ranulph also finished the Marathon des Sables, or MDS, a 6-day, about 250 kilometres ultramarathon, as the oldest British runner, and Mary Curie raised a total of £1.8 million as a result, another step to the £20 million they have almost raised over a lifetime of adventures. Sir Ranulph remains the first person to have crossed both ice caps and summited Everest, 6,000 feet higher than any of other 6 continents' highest peaks. Our final book is from Richard Wiseman, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Hertfordshire. He is also the recipient of multiple science awards and a prolific writer of science and psychology-based books, including Quirkology and 59 Seconds. Shoot for the Moon looks at the life lessons we can learn from the extraordinary people that accomplished the seemingly impossible mission of bringing mankind to the moon in 1969. Here he is speaking to the Phil Ferguson Show.
Yeah, it's a curious one in terms of its origin. I was at a party and talking to a comedian friend of mine, as Helen Keane, and Helen is into space stuff. She's sort of into space comedy and so on, has done lots of shows about it. And we're talking about that this would be the 50th anniversary of the moon landings and all the amazing technology and how that's been so well documented over the years. And I said, and it was a throwaway comment, I said, was anyone written about the mental technology, the kind of mindset that would get us to the moon? And she said no, she didn't think they had, at least not in detail. And I said, well, how would you go about doing that? I don't know anything about Apollo. And she said, well, at the heart of the missions were the mission controllers, that kind of famous room that you see in Houston. Ideally, you'd want to go and interview those folks. And I said, well, how would I do that? And she said, well, you go and talk to my friend, who's Craig, who was a welder from Wales. And he has befriended all these mission controllers. He's another huge space fan. And so Craig wrote to the mission controllers. They wrote back and went, yep, we get interviewed about everything, but not about psychology. Be fascinated and happy to do it. And so I interviewed them. I interviewed the team that put Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon, and really about their mindset. What was it that allowed them to do this thing, which quite frankly was the closest thing to impossible that humanity will ever face? And they pulled it off. And the book is about that adventure. It's about those interviews, and it's about the lessons learned and ways in which we can all incorporate them into our own lives.
The Apollo 11 mission, landing on the moon on July the 20th, 1969, was driven by a strong sense of purpose and competition, reflecting the American dream of innovation and freedom. This concept of motivation applies beyond space missions. At the University of Pennsylvania, a call center raised funds more effectively after staff interacted with beneficiaries, boosting their sense of purpose. Similarly, competition enhances performance, as shown in studies since 1898. Cyclists, for instance, performed better when racing against others. This effect intensifies in team settings and against known rivals, demonstrating the power of purpose and competition in motivating individuals and teams, which is something we've seen even with Sir Ranulph's book. The landing's success was partly due to the lunar orbit rendezvous idea, which emerged from months of exploration and rest periods. Breaks and sleep are crucial for innovation, as demonstrated by famous figures like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Stanford psychologist Marilee Opezzo's 2014 study revealed a 60% increase in creativity after exercise breaks, with lasting effects. Similarly, psychologist Ulrich Wagner's 2004 research showed that participants who slept before tackling a complex task were more likely to find innovative solutions than those who didn't. Leading companies like Google and Nike now encourage rest and naps to enhance problem-solving abilities. Achieving success often hinges on maintaining a positive mindset and finding inspirational role models. The Apollo 11 team, a prime example, consisted largely of individuals from modest backgrounds who surmounted various challenges. Their success in the historic moon landing underscored the power of a positive outlook in facing obstacles. Cultivating such an outlook involves reflecting on past achievements and using visual reminders of these successes. Additionally, drawing inspiration from figures like Helen Keller, who overcame immense adversity to achieve remarkable feats, can reinforce the belief that extraordinary accomplishments are within reach, regardless of the challenges faced. Adopting a growth mindset is essential for success, particularly in overcoming failures. This concept, popularized by Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck in the 1980s, contrasts with a fixed mindset, where abilities are seen as unchangeable. Dweck's study with high school students in a challenging math program demonstrated that students with a growth mindset who see their abilities as malleable and learn from failures outperform their peers with a fixed mindset. The growth-minded students embraced challenges and viewed failures as opportunities to improve, unlike their fixed-minded counterparts who feared failure as a confirmation of their perceived limitations. This mindset fosters a resilient, adaptive approach to learning and problem-solving, making it a crucial factor in achieving success. To combat procrastination, Jerry Bostick, an Apollo 11 flight controller, advised not to wait for perfect conditions, but to act despite limitations. This mindset is crucial for everyone, not just scientists. One effective approach is to tackle tasks incrementally. For instance, setting a modest goal of losing 1 pound a month rather than 10 pounds at once makes the task more manageable and achievable. Similarly, for ambitious projects like starting a software startup, working gradually, such as only on weekends, can lead to progress without overwhelming oneself. Additionally, setting smart deadlines is crucial. A 2014 study by economist Yamping Tu demonstrated that deadlines perceived as more distant lead to more procrastination. Thus, deadlines should be set within a current time frame, avoiding extensions into new years or months to encourage prompt action and reduce delay. In critical situations like Jerry Griffin's experience as the lead flight director during the Apollo 12 mission, tough decisions are inevitable. When Apollo 12 was struck by lightning just after launch, Griffin faced a dilemma: abort the mission or continue. Despite the initial data disruption, communication with the astronauts enabled a solution, allowing the mission to proceed. This incident illustrates the importance of confronting fears and making informed decisions. By regularly facing uncomfortable situations, one can develop courage and improve decision-making skills. This principle applies to various aspects of life, encouraging individuals to face their fears, like public speaking or swimming, to grow braver and more adept in handling crises. During the mission, a crucial moment arose as the lunar module Eagle approached the Moon. An alert code 1202 appeared, indicating the computer was overloaded with calculations for the lunar descent and communications with Earth. Thanks to mission leader Jack Garman's preparedness, who quickly identified the issue as a manageable computer glitch, the mission continued successfully. This incident highlights the importance of anticipating potential problems. Gary Klein, a psychologist, suggests using a pre-mortem approach for preparation. By imagining every possible issue in advance, one can plan and address these challenges, ensuring a smoother process in high-pressure situations. This method is beneficial in any critical project, like organizing a fundraiser, where foreseeing and mitigating potential issues such as incorrect event details can lead to success. Adaptability is crucial for achieving goals and fostering happiness, as demonstrated by Buzz Aldrin's quick thinking during the Apollo 11 mission. When a crucial button broke during the lunar module's landing, Aldrin ingeniously used a felt-tip pen to activate the ignition, showcasing the power of adaptability in overcoming unexpected challenges. This event highlights the importance of preparing for unforeseen obstacles in any major project. A 2003 study by psychologist Frank Bond further supports this, revealing that adaptable employees are not only more productive, but also happier than their less adaptable counterparts. The Apollo missions exemplify how adaptability can turn dreams into reality, encouraging us to embrace challenges with creativity and courage. So to sum up, in Climb Your Mountain, Sir Ranulph draws from his extensive experience in facing life's challenges, emphasizes the importance of seizing opportunities and pursuing dreams. He notes that while adventurers rarely seek his advice on expeditions, Parents often inquire about guidance for their children. His advice is consistent. Ensure they complete their education and encourage them to seize opportunities when they arise. Fiennes reflects on the role of luck in his own life, acknowledging that it played a part in realizing his ambitions. However, he cautions that luck alone may not guarantee success. Individuals must actively seek and seize opportunities when they present themselves. He underscores the value of memories, friendships, and the pursuit of a powerful dream. Fiennes encourages readers to take risks, pursue their dreams, and climb the metaphorical mountains, wishing them luck in their endeavours. Professor Wiseman says in Shoot for the Moon that achieving the impossible, as shown by the Apollo lunar teams, requires more than luck. It involves finding deeper purpose, taking breaks, contemplating problems, cultivating courage, and preparing for the unexpected. These strategies can turn lofty goals into attainable realities. One of the things I learned from years of campaigning for women's rights was sisterhood and the importance of community. From working the rounds at festivals, raising money, to organising marches, the spirit of camaraderie was incredible, and those memories have stayed with me. We're stronger together. What do you think? What are the most important life lessons you've learned from the extraordinary moments of your life? Let us know. Please join in on the conversation by following @HowToBe247 on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and subscribe on the podcast, which can be found via www.howtobe247.com. We have Spotify polls, so feel free to send your responses there too. You can even check out all our exclusive unseen bonus material from every single interview, all for a price of a coffee on both Spotify and Patreon under the name Behind the Scenes, exclusives from the How to Be Books podcast. All the latest ones are on Spotify, while more than 30 exclusives are on Patreon. We've also launched a shop on Patreon where you can buy one-off exclusives. Sign up to be part of the movement. Please do leave a review if you found this helpful and you want to be featured. Remember to check out the website as well. We got to see the incredible fantasy writer and the brains behind American Gods, Good Omens, and Coraline, Neil Gaiman. We also read the 970-page mammoth of a memoir by Barbara Streisand and the late Tupac Shakur's autobiography. Check out the reviews. Our guest poster, Morgan Christie, wrote about reflections as her new book, Boolean Logic, is released. And of course, we are keeping across the Palestine situation with a spate of violence against writers in Gaza. Before we go, here are Georgie Shears, a life design strategist and founder of the Shift Life Transformation System, as well as Stephen Hesketh, the hospitality hero, on their thoughts. And keep listening to the end about our wonderful sponsors Zencastr, who made all of this possible. See you in 2 weeks' time.
I've learned that every difficult and beautiful experience in life brings with it genuine growth, expanding our knowledge, our capabilities, and our beliefs in what's possible, reminding us that life is a journey of constant evolution, learning and growth. Having my children showed me that I am way stronger and more powerful than I ever thought imaginable. I can do anything. My experiences of severe panic attacks and anxiety were there as a loud warning signal, telling me to take notice, something needed to change, teaching me we cannot ignore our true thoughts and feelings, and living true to ourselves is the key to inner peace. Losing people I love has made me so grateful for each day. It's fueled my passion and purpose to live life on my own terms and help others do the same, not as society and external forces say we should. This, I believe, is the true path to fulfillment and happiness. These are the biggest and most valuable lessons I've learned.
In relation to the biggest lessons I've learned along the way of life is definitely actually the skill of hospitality. It's the ability to be human, the ability to say hello. It's the ability to welcome people into your home, into your business, into your life. It starts with a simple hello, and it's been the biggest treasure of my life because that has led me on to a very, very successful career in hospitality.
Please check out Zencastr. We do all our interviews with it, and it's for free. If you've ever thought about podcasting before and realised that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code HowToBeBooks and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.